think I'm going to get started. We're just going to go through the agenda. My name is Joanna Frank. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for Active Design. So we'll let people in as they join us over the next few minutes. So let's just, we'll start with the agenda so you guys know what's going to be going on for the next hour and 15 minutes. First of all, thank you all for joining us, and a sincere thank you to the panelists who have joined us to share their expertise today about the Fitwel viral response module, which is, as you all know, brand new. So today's panelists really represent some of the earliest users of the Fitwel viral response module, and they're going to be sharing kind of why they have been using the Fitwel viral response module and then their experience with using it so far. So sharing their deep expertise with you, answering your questions, and so we really appreciate that. We also have an extra and surprise guest who I think you guys are going to really appreciate, and that is my colleague, Sara Karerat. She is the Director of Applied Research at the Center for Active Design, and we are going to start today with an explanation of the research behind the viral response module and a bit of a deep dive into the research behind COVID-19 and viral response module generally, the methodology and so on. So we thought we would do that to start with, just to kind of lay the groundwork of how we at the Center for Active Design go about translating the academic research into these practical strategies that we then provide to you as Fitwel standards. We rarely talk about our methods, and we think that it's actually really important that you understand the rigor that goes into the creation of Fitwel. So we're going to kick it off with that to start with Sara, and then we're going to have the panel with our fantastic leaders from the real estate industry. You are welcome to submit your questions throughout the discussion, and we expect to have time at the end to answer questions, but we will also try to answer questions as we go along, and our team from CFAD is also on the webinar and can answer specific questions, and we will upload resources as we go along as well if we talk about resources in the course of the discussion. So thank you, and we will start with that discussion with Sara. So there's me at the top, and there's Sara, so Director of Applied Research. So thank you and welcome, Sara. So we don't usually see the team behind Fitwel and behind the Center for Active Design, so I appreciate that. So I'm gonna stick to the script when I talk to Sara, because her work is much more technical than mine. You know, I spend my life talking for a living. Sara leads the team that really is looking at that research coming out of academic institutions around the world. And the process that we use behind the Fitwel viral response module is very similar to the process that we really use as the underpinning of all of our work, whether it's Fitwel work, if it's a publication, if it's any kind of work that we do, and we do a lot of other work other than Fitwel. And we always start by looking at the evidence base, by looking at the research. And so, you know, when a global pandemic is declared, our immediate response is to go look at the research. And so my first question is really, when COVID was declared as a global pandemic back in March, your team went back to the research and did a deep dive into the role that the built environment plays in mitigating, yes, the risk of COVID-19, but also the role that the built environment plays in mitigating the risk of infectious respiratory disease generally. Could you describe to us kind of what that process is and kind of give us more idea of the role of the built environment in mitigating infectious respiratory disease? And I'm using my words very carefully, and maybe you can also explain why I'm using those kind of words too. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joanna. I'm excited to be here. Thanks to everybody for joining. So as you all know, at the moment when COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, and even in the months leading up to that, there was severe confusion about how the real estate industry should be reacting to COVID. And we were hearing an urgent need for credible, digestible information that could really guide the industry's response moving forward. So as we've learned over the past few months, a pandemic situation is extremely unique, and there's a very distinct set of strategies and tactics that need to be implemented. And while Fitwel's existing scorecards did touch on infectious disease, in order to fully address a widespread contagious disease outbreak, like the one we're facing and continue to face with COVID, we needed to revisit the evidence base with a new and more focused and directed lens. So Fitwel was originally created to address chronic disease. So our team saw a real need to dig more deeply into all of the science around how the built environment could not only mitigate risk of COVID-19 transmission, but as Joanna mentioned, also looking at how the built environment could mitigate transmission of other infectious diseases with similar patterns, specifically focusing on infectious respiratory diseases like influenza, legionnaires, strep throat, among others. And the reason that we're being so distinct with the language and talking about infectious respiratory diseases rather than infectious diseases broadly is that we are not addressing diseases like malaria. We want to be very clear that we are addressing those diseases that can be transmitted between people. So we also wanted to explore other consequences of a pandemic and how the built environment could be leveraged to address those factors. For example, as I'm sure so many have experienced, we have seen this pandemic have profound effects on mental health, with the Kaiser Family Foundation finding that more than 50% of adults in the United States reported that their mental health has been negatively impacted due to worry and stress over the coronavirus. So we really wanted to dig into how the real estate industry could alleviate some of the negative impacts this pandemic was having on not only disease transmission, but also the mental health of affected populations. So we first did this through a publication which we named Research to Action, Building Health for All in the Face of COVID-19. This publication included 5 chapters and dug into various topics, including design and operation strategies that can reduce the spread of infectious disease, how we can build trust within indoor environments, how our residential settings can be maximized to support mental health, and how to optimize dense environments to mitigate the risk of transmission. We also did dig into tactics that can reduce disparities. These disparities have always existed across the health and public health landscape, but they've become increasingly apparent and severe during the COVID-19 crisis. So as I mentioned before, given the constantly evolving nature of the research related to COVID-19, we expanded our scope to not just address COVID-19, but also address risks posed by other common contagious diseases. So for example, while the research around aerosolized transmission of COVID was still emerging back in March and we had a lot to learn, we did have a firm understanding that so many other infectious diseases could be spread through aerosolized transmission. So droplets spreading through the air. So we wanted to make sure we addressed those concerns through ventilation and filtration. Now, in recent months, we have a much firmer understanding of how COVID is spread, and the science has confirmed that the presence of aerosolized transmission is a cause of how this disease is transmitted, hence the efficacy of masks and improved ventilation and filtration practices, which are included in the viral response module.
Fantastic, thank you. And so all of this kind of translation of that research, so looking at COVID-specific research and all of the research 50 years of research, looking at other respiratory infectious disease, 100 years of research, all of that is kind of what creates the foundation for the strategies that are in the viral response module. So while COVID is new, the research around how to mitigate infectious respiratory disease is not new. So I think that should give folks this, a sense of security that a lot is known, while some pieces are still evolving around COVID specifically. Can you just also quickly give us that definition? You mentioned that Fitwel was originally created for chronic disease, whereas COVID is an infectious disease. Can you give us the kind of the 2-line definition of chronic versus infectious? Because that is a question I am asked often by folks who don't come out of health. So if you can just give us the 2-line difference between the two, just so that we can tick off all the definitions, please.
Definitely. So chronic conditions are defined broadly as conditions that last 1 year or more and require ongoing medical attention that limit activities of daily living. So some examples include diabetes, asthma, cardiovascular disease, and these conditions are not contagious. They're largely lifestyle driven and impacted by what in the public health community we call social determinants of health. So things like education, housing, socioeconomic status, discrimination, things like that. Meanwhile, infectious diseases, which are also referred to as communicable diseases, just to add another confusing term into the mix, those are easily spread through pathogens. So those can be bacteria, viruses, parasites, or fungi. And we're largely focusing on those that are spread through bacteria and viruses. And they can be spread from person to person transmission, and meaning that they're contagious.
Okay. So I come from the real estate industry, guys. So none of us went to public health school, right? So this is an education for all of us. Although I think we have all just gone through an education in the last 9 months around public health and public health language. So why did we need a new certification? Like, just to kind of tell us, like, so we have the Fitwel certifications for buildings and for sites, and now we have a new certification, which is the Fitwel Viral Response Module. And there are some pieces of the module which are different from our typical building and site scorecard. So let's just touch on the fact that there are some minimum requirements for the viral response module where we don't have minimum requirements for a typical building and site scorecard. So can we just kind of talk about why we have minimum requirements and why we needed a new certification?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with sort of why we needed a new certification. So as Joanna and I've talked about, we added a huge amount of research to our library when we revisited the evidence base with a more focused lens on infectious respiratory diseases. And one thing we learned, and I'm sure all of you are well aware now, these diseases are very often spread through indoor environments. So those spaces where people congregate, where they live, work, study, socialize, all of those spaces are a risk factor. So we were hearing from our partners and sort of folks across our network that they needed solid, credible guidance that provided detailed information on what policies and strategies they needed to implement and adopt to effectively address the concerns of their occupants that they were hearing constantly. So in addition, we were hearing that many of our partners were looking for strategies that could be applied across the entire company. So that really informed the structure of the viral response module, where it's adopted on an entity level as a first step and then applied to specific projects. And you'll hear more about that from our industry advisors and how they've sort of applied this. And then getting into minimum requirements, one example that I want to highlight is so hand washing signage. Hand washing signage is a strategy that's included in the Fitwel building and scorecards already. It's one of the key defenses associated with diminished risk of person-to-person transmission, specifically washing our hands for 20 seconds. I'm sure you've been hearing that. This may seem like a simple task, but it's something that the evidence demonstrates people just aren't adopting. They're not using soap, maybe not drying them properly. So there is a need for a sort of comprehensive hand hygiene strategy. And in light of the Fitwel Viral Response Module being distinctly focused on mitigating the risk of viral transmission, we saw this as a necessity. We could not, as a credible resource for our partners, say that they were effectively addressing viral and infectious respiratory disease transmission without requiring that they had a comprehensive hand hygiene strategy. Conversely, we include hand washing signage in our Fitwel building scorecard, but since that scorecard is really focused on holistic health, and we identify which health impact categories, there are 7, you can check them out on our website. We include those, and there's so many different ways that each of the strategies is impacting health. We see it as one way. It's important for those that do want to focus on infectious disease transmission, but let's say a project wants to focus more on physical activity, then the health impact categories guide them towards those strategies that are more applicable. So that's really the distinction between why some strategies aren't minimum requirements in the Fitwel building scorecards, but are in the viral response module.
Great, fantastic. And then lastly, could you just give us a little inkling in the process as far as with this time we brought in, we always have the CDC as our partner, but this time we also had an academic advisory, and we also always have industry advisors as well, but we added that academic advisory to add a kind of an amazing group of academics from around the world to add their expertise around behavior, mental health, as well as infectious disease And then we should wrap it up and get to our panel as well.
Yeah, I want to move on to the real experts who have really applied this module. But what we did is, based on all the research that we had gathered and analyzed in developing the research to action series, which I believe we're going to share the link to in the chat, we were able to identify the 3 goals of the module, which were enhance indoor environments, encourage behavioral change, and build occupant trust. These 3 goals not only made up the different sections of the viral response module, but also helped guide the development of 3 distinct academic advisory groups focused on different areas of the scorecard or the module. So we enlisted leaders across a range of academic fields, including epidemiology, behavior change, mental health, and environmental health, to ensure that we were accurately translating the research into some pretty technical guidance when it comes to ventilation, filtration, cleaning practices, things like that. So members of our academic advisory, we were lucky enough to have folks from Harvard, Columbia, and even as far away as Queensland University. So with their guidance, we were able to make sure that what we were translating and the strategies that we were including were actually going to be impactful when it comes to reducing risk. And then from there, there was a parallel team of real estate industry advisors who were prototyping, and those are the folks that you're going to hear from now after our conversation.
Great, fantastic. And then one other thing that the team did was, because this is so technical and because some of these are minimum requirements, and there really is no wiggle room, right? I mean, this isn't up for interpretation. So what we did was we wrote a lot of turnkey policies. So really what you can do is you can use the policies from the viral response module, and you can download them, and then you can actually use the policy as it's written for your own project or for your own company, because this stuff is technical. This stuff is not, like I said, this isn't a guide. This isn't a kind of like, oh, you can do something approximating this. It's actually, it is specific. So we did a lot of that writing for you. So thank you very much, Sara. And we will have Sara for question and answer later. So if you guys have technical questions, specific questions, if you want to really get in the weeds about the health, we have Sara. So maybe I'll ask her some more questions later. So thank you so much. And thank you to your team as well. Bye. Great. So now I'd love to introduce the panel of fantastic users. Oh, there they are. So let me introduce them all. We have Jonathan from Tower Companies. Thank you so much, Jonathan. They're all going to introduce themselves more. I'm just going to give you their names. Philippe from Triovest Realty Advisors. Natalie is coming from Hudson Pacific Properties, and Nichole from Nuveen Real Estate. And why I'm really excited to have this particular group coming together as a panel is everybody is coming from a really different sector within the real estate community, and they also have very different roles within the real estate profession, and they serve different stakeholders. So as they introduce themselves, they're going to just kind of touch on their jobs and the stakeholders that they serve, because I feel like for you folks listening, you'll understand, and I think your own roles that you play, you'll hear perhaps mirrored in the roles that these guys play. So I'm hoping that because of the diversity of our panel, you'll all understand, like, oh yeah, that's the role I play. That seems very familiar to what I do. That's something that's, kind of really tangible, something that I can take away from this. So thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you all also, obviously, for jumping in and using the viral response module as some of the very first users in the world to do so. So thank you, and I'm going to ask, first of all, Jonathan, do you mind kicking it off and telling us about what you do, who Tower Companies are, and the stakeholders that you serve? So thank you.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, thank you, Joanna, Sara, and Center for Active Design team for having us on. We're really, really happy to be here. And so I am the sustainability manager for the Tower Companies, and the Tower Companies is a family-owned and privately held commercial real estate developer, owner, and manager based in the DC area. And we own and manage a good mix of commercial office, multifamily, and a smattering of retail as well. And so as part of my role, it's kind of what it sounds like. I lead all of our environmental and sustainability initiatives, but this has really changed over the last few years as health and wellness has emerged as a leading trend and an important aspect of our business. And so it's expanded from thinking about sustainability as it relates to the environment to thinking about sustainability as it relates to our people, and really looking at how real estate can be a foundation for change, and specifically in this context, how real estate can support the health and well-being of all the people that interact with our portfolio. And so my responsibilities have really expanded to include that strategy, and we see Fitwel as something that is very core to that strategy. And in terms of stakeholders, for us specifically, since we're privately held and family owned, the biggest focus is always going to be on our staff and on our tenants and clients in our buildings. And so really everything we do, especially with COVID-19 in this context, it revolves around these stakeholders and it shapes what we do. And we've always believed that, our business is the most successful when our staff and when our tenants are healthy and happy. And so we've been prioritizing this for a long time, for decades, but I think in the last few years, and especially 2020 now, this has been elevated, and it's something that's going to be important as we go forward and head into the new year.
Great, thank you. Nichole, for kind of, I would say the other end of the spectrum as far as scale is concerned, could you give us a little insight as to what Nuveen?
Hi, I'm Nichole Wiley, Director in the office sector of asset management in the Northwest. My assets are located in San Francisco, Denver, and Utah. And prior to COVID-19, the pandemic, asset management was very siloed. I mean, we're very close to our third-party property management teams. We heavily focused on sustainability prior to this. And I think that, now that we're in this situation, we all have had to pivot and focus on health and wellness and airborne sicknesses and diseases. We've all had to sort of just acclimate and be flexible. And so, our stakeholders, I would say, are investors, of course, because we invest in office buildings, and we also do have, different sectors. We have industrial, multifamily. So our stakeholders are the investors, the tenants, and the end users. We want to just make sure that the asset we own, we're being responsible. We are looking out for the end users, the tenants, and also the people that work in the buildings. So that's what we do.
Great, fantastic. Natalie, can you give us a little insight over there on the West Coast with Pacific Properties?
Hi, I'm Natalie Teear. I lead ESG and innovation at Hudson Pacific Properties, which is a public REIT with about 16 million square feet of Class A office and studio space in West Coast cities. So from LA all the way up to Vancouver, from LA, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Seattle, and Vancouver. Most of our portfolio is office, but we all have a LA-based studio portfolio. We're actually the largest independent operator of studios in the country. Our tenant base is primarily large tech and media companies, and because of that, and because of the geographies that we're in, sustainability, health and wellness, community impact, these are all things that are really core to our business strategy. They're who we are, they're how we differentiate, they're how we win. It's what our tenants care about, it's what top talent cares about, it's how we recruit people, it's how we secure leases and maintain really successful tenant relationships. And it's how we engage with investors and articulate our business strategy to investors. So I love the job. It's really fun because it feels like a positive feedback loop. The better we do on ESG, the better our business does. And health and wellness is integral to that. Our ESG platform we refer to as Better Blueprint, a better blueprint for buildings, for our properties, for our neighborhoods, for our cities. And within that, we have three main priorities: in sustainability, health, and equity. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. And Philippe, a little something about Triovest. I think the folks in North America maybe are least familiar with Triovest. So if you can tell us who you are. I'm very familiar with Triovest. But
Good afternoon, everyone, East Coast, and good morning for those who are joining in from the West and beyond. My name is Philippe. I'm Head of Innovation and Sustainability at Triovest, a similar role to Natalie's in many ways. Triovest is a large manager, owner, developer of commercial real estate. In Canada, we operate in all the major markets, approximately 40 million square feet valued for a US audience at over 8 billion US. We've got about 400 buildings, in excess of 4,000 tenants, and it's, like many of us, been quite an adventure over the past 6 months as we've collectively learned a lot about what Sara was sharing with us earlier today. Certainly the pursuit of health and well-being's been on our radar really since, in a systematic way, since 2013. Certainly health and safety is a top priority, and it is for most of our firms, I would imagine, on the call. But I think really with the advent of the research from Center for Active Design and with the Well Building Standard being launched in 2013 onwards and the GRESB Health and Wellbeing module, it's been upping our collective knowledge in industry about how to apply leading practices. Where we're at today is how do we learn really quickly and scale some of the practices that we're talking about and that are being codified in the viral response modules so that we can collectively meet the questions and the needs emerging from our tenant bases, from our occupants, from visitors to retail shopping centers, and also the needs of our building operations and our property management team. These are key stakeholders with whom I work. I serve as chair of our National Operations Committee internally, and it's been a lot of work trying to solve this immediate problem that we've all been wrestling with. So pleasure to be here today.
thank you so much. And so I'm going to jump right into that science-based question, that piece that you just brought up, and that is that, you know, we have to be able to solve it. So how important is it to be able to talk to the folks that you serve? Philippe, in your case, you just mentioned, you know, you kind of have a diverse portfolio. In the retail sector, you're dealing with folks who you only have a very brief interaction with. So how do you communicate the science base? I mean, where does the role of a certification play in communicating? Let's kind of talk about like how you communicate with your stakeholders when you have limited interaction. And I kind of want to talk about the motivation for why do you go beyond just doing the actual strategies to using a certification? Was that kind of part of the rationale as to why it has a value?
So in terms of why certification, if we reflect on various building rating systems that have evolved really over the past 25 years since the advent of LEED, what building rating systems do for us is they provide a common language and framework around which we can then identify some strategies to be implemented. It gives us scorecards and a important body of knowledge about how to adapt our built environment to the particular situation that we're facing right now. And the value of a certification in Triovest's perspective is, while we might have developed, and we did develop very quickly, a tenant reintegration playbook, some parts of Canada were really not hit particularly quickly. It was a bit of a different story in different pockets of all our communities across the world. We were getting ready to welcome tenants back in early, and we had a tenant reintegration playbook, sought the latest science, was engaged directly, Joanna, with you and the Center for Active Design team to make sure that we're current. But it's one thing to say, I've done all these good things and I've written these policies and procedures. It's another to make sure that you're measuring up against what is now, in my opinion, the gold standard for how we should be responding and what policies and procedures we should be implementing. And it's moving beyond we say we're doing a good job to we've had it checked and verified by a reputable third party that you're doing a lot of good things. So certainly lots of ways that we can communicate to build trust, Joanna, from signage and really reaching out proactively to our tenants to understand what's top of mind for you. What are you concerned about? What are your plans to get back to work? And how can we make sure we align with your expectations? But a lot of communication is the key, even those small touch points with visitors to sites.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and Natalie, I wanted to throw this over to you as well. I know that everybody on the panel were already doing a lot of the policies. And so can you kind of talk about the motivation for going that one step further to really be an early adopter, be kind of part of the process of using a certification?
Yeah, well, I like the way Philippe was describing kind of the purpose of building certifications. And what I would add to that is, I think it's really all about trust. And I've spent, as I'm sure everyone on the phone has, so much time in the past 6 months thinking about the ins and outs. How do we make our buildings safe? What are we doing? What are our standard operating procedures? How do we roll them out in a consistent way across the portfolio? How do we bring in external subject matter experts in a effective way? How do we stay on top of the science and make sure we're continually learning and adapting and evolving? And we put together really detailed manuals for internally, and then really worked hard to dial that down into digestible tenant communications, memos. We've rolled out an app so that we can communicate changes and updates in real time to all of our tenants across our entire portfolio. And we're really working to communicate that to tenants. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's so sad to think about it in some ways. I'm sure that probably 99% of the people in our buildings are not reading. I mean, maybe they'll open the document and they'll scan it. They're not going to read the entire FAQ document. And we worked really hard to get it down to 4 pages, and they're still not good. But what will matter to them is if they see it, one seal of approval. And that's what LEED does for sustainability, and a lot of other certifications do. Most people are never going to look at the details, and God bless them, because everyone has busy lives. So, I mean, and I'm the same way, right? We all do. But a shorthand that is trustworthy, that says this is a safe, healthy building, in our opinion, is so valuable.
Sure. Nichole, you're working with kind of asset managers and stuff, as I understand it. Can I kind of bring you into the conversation from that perspective? I know when we talked about this, you were kind of wanting the whole package. Can you kind of talk about that?
Sure. So, from our standpoint, in the beginning of March, when this whole thing, occurred, we quickly got a group together and we said, okay, what will our goals be for the end users, which, as I said earlier, are investors, the tenants. We work very closely with a third-party property management firms. And so we said, okay, let's get together this COVID playbook, which was, the goal was to send something out to these property managers that was very basic, but hit all what we thought were all the touch points of, the cleaning, the masks, the gloves, the sanitizing stations. So we put all that together, and we thought it was a robust document. But then, our sustainability team, who does a great job, they've been connecting with you guys, and they're like, hey, there's this viral response program. We want you to take the COVID playbook that you guys put together, and let's make sure that Fitwel is validating our efforts so that we can with confidence say, okay, what we're putting out here, it's all certified. It all has a stamp of approval. It's based on science. It's based on research. And, our main priority at that moment was, okay, we need to make sure that everyone knows that our priority is everyone's, safety and wellness. So, it's a little different for us because we are working with a lot of the third-party property management providers, and they also have their own processes and procedures. But what we wanted to do was standardize one playbook, and know that, in the back of our minds, okay, this is a good program. And these are great processes and procedures that we can just give to everyone, and they can follow it, and it works. And to your point in the beginning, it's not just about COVID, right? We're preparing ourselves for all airborne illnesses. So
that's great. No, I appreciate everything you guys are saying, because there was a lot of rigor. I mean, we were very quiet for the first 4 months of COVID, and you guys were we were hearing from you all, and we're like, we're reading all the research, guys. So we were doing our homework, I promise. But I know that out there there was a lot of pressure on a lot of people. So I do appreciate that you guys feel the effort that is behind the standard. Jonathan, I want to come to you because you're dealing directly with your residents, right? So you kind of have a different relationship with the folks, with staff and with residential, because I know that no buildings have been empty. Basically, no buildings have been empty, even if buildings have been very, kind of at minimum staff. But the residential buildings were really not empty. So you were, I know, because we were talking, or you were talking to the team throughout, and you were really kind of, the residential sector was on the front lines of this, right? Dealing in real time with how to address this, and the role of residential, the sector. I think we can have an entirely other panel about how that's going to change moving forward. But I would love to hear kind of your perspective. I think the next question, we're going to kind of talk about trust, and we're going to talk about the kind of the broader impact that COVID has had beyond the kind of physical viral transmission. But just kind of the role of certification when you have that kind of more intimate relationship in the residential sector, and then kind of the role of a certification in working with your staff and that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right, multifamily apartment buildings were the front lines, and there really was no time to kind of look at the research and sit back and think about what we're going to do. We really had to act quickly and yeah, and right. And the really interesting thing about it is we learned so much in those first couple weeks, the first month of getting that response ready, that it really informed what we did in the rest of our portfolio. Multifamily was really the foundation of a lot of what we learned to do elsewhere. And in terms of a certification, I can echo a little bit of what I heard, and maybe I'll just do that by like the two common threads I think I kind of heard throughout and can add to. One is that Philippe was hitting on this. It's one thing for our company to say, here's the XYZ of what we're doing. Here's our plan. Here's our response. It's another thing for the Center for Active Design and the Fitwel program to help us demonstrate that we've actually done that and show that we've made a commitment and we've gone beyond just the bare minimum of what the response from the local government is requiring, and really trying to do, the best thing possible for the health of our staff and our tenants. And being able to communicate that, which is the second thread I heard, is really challenging. Obviously there's signage in the buildings and we're doing everything we can to share that information, but having a concrete certification to back that all up, to say, look, we looked under the hood and we went through, this research, and someone helped us synthesize that research in a concrete format. And that's what this certification represents, gives people a peace of mind. It gives us a peace of mind that, we followed the research and we've done the best that we could for our tenants. And I think that's the same no matter what building type, but in the multifamily sector, it's definitely, I think, folks naturally were more scared of this in the beginning because people were home 24/7 and it was a different environment. But I think this gives everyone a way to talk about what we've done, and it gives everyone a way to demonstrate, the value we've created and that we're prioritizing them. And I think like that, honestly, in real estate, if you're not doing this, you're going to fall behind.
Interesting. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting to see how it's going to evolve, right? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but back in the spring, it's kind of funny time is so amorphous now, right? But back in the spring, I couldn't even conceive of this going into the fall. And now here we are going into the winter. But we're thinking of it as acute, short term, and then long term. And we're really planning for those three time periods, right? There's the acute need of that immediate response to COVID. Then there's the short term, which is this kind of what we're in now, which is the kind of that immediate panic, I would say, has now dissipated into a short term response where we have general idea of the course of this disease, and now we have to address it, obviously, and we are addressing it. And then there's the long term, which is the how are we better prepared for future pandemics, which is, I think, what we're also trying to address with the viral response module, that we can have better policies in place, we can have better planning in place. And so that kind of leads me to the next kind of big question and the next kind of part of the discussion. And that is that I feel like as the real estate industry, we're all pretty comfortable with mechanical systems and the ways of dealing with any kind of issue, basically, using bricks and mortar, because that is the language that we deal with. I realize whatever I'm dealing with, I like a nice tangible solution. So we can use our mechanical systems, we can use cleaning products, you know, those kind of things I feel like are our first way of thinking about problems, or in actually anything. I feel like in life, I like to think of it as bricks and mortar. But with the viral response module, it is split into these 3 equal pieces. So the first part is really looking at the physical condition of, look, how do you physically mitigate the transmission of the virus using, like we talked about, the kind of the mechanical systems, the cleaning protocols, and so on. The next section is really looking at behavior, because as we all know, human behavior has a massive part to play in viral transmission. So if you do or don't wear a mask, has a big impact on the transmission of the virus. Whether you do or don't wash your hands correctly has a massive impact on the transmission of the virus. And actually, we can really impact human behavior with our built environment. So humans are very influenced by cues in their built environment. Messaging, we are really impacted by messaging. We are really impacted by visual cues, by signs of disorder and order and these kind of things, which I think is really interesting. We're quite simple creatures, which is a good thing in some ways. We're quite predictable too, which is also a good thing, or a bad thing. And then the last part, I'm not being political at all. See, I'm avoiding it. And then the last part of the viral response module is building trust. So that's really looking at mental health, which Sara kind of talked about at the beginning, that with any great stress, with any great kind of, you know, emergency, such as the pandemic, you see, you know, a very dramatic impact on mental health. And again, very predictable. And it was seen with SARS, it's been seen historically with any kind of major emergency. So how do you leverage the built environment to impact mental health? And again, there's a lot of research behind this. And so the way that the viral response module is set up, for those of you who are not familiar with it yet, is that the 3 sections are equal because the research is substantial around each section, and they are equally important, and they all impact health equally. So I kind of want to talk to you guys about it, because we were cautious, quite frankly, about putting it out in this way, not because the research didn't say so, not because we weren't, you know, committed to doing so, but because we didn't know how it would be received by the community, because we are extending ourselves into HR policy and into areas that go beyond the typical reach of a facility manager or somebody, you know, kind of in real estate. So Natalie, I can see you nodding your head there, so you get to respond first to this. So can you kind of talk about the fact that we really are broadening into this much broader impact of real estate?
Yeah, we loved seeing those 3 pillars of the standard or the module when we saw the first draft, and one reason is it actually really aligned perfectly with the framework we had put together for ourselves anyway, and our reintegration strategy revolves around what we call the 4 C's, and they're communication, confidence, cooperation, and convenience. And I won't go through all of them, but basically if you map them back, confidence for us is around confidence that the building is safe, which gets to the mechanical piece, the first part of the Fitwel pillar. For us, then cooperation is around everyone plays their part, and we're going to try to nudge and use nudge theory to drive behaviors, but we can't do it alone, and we need tenants to help us with on-hand hygiene and a lot of the other issues that Sara spoke about, and you, Joanna. So that gets to the second pillar, and then on the third one around trust, that for us, that's largely around communication and everything. And it's two-way communication. It's us communicating with tenants and vice versa, and really understanding that there's a foundation of trust, that if we're going to keep people safe, we need to trust that tenants will notify us when there's a positive case, and they need to trust that we will notify them, and that there will be this dialogue. And that's been an evolving and really critical piece of our overall strategy. And we really liked seeing that it was such an important piece of the Fitwel standard.
That's great to hear. Nichole, can you also kind of talk about your role kind of in that intersection between kind of the physical and then moving out more into the communications and stuff?
Oh. Sorry, I was on mute. So sure. So from an employee perspective, you know, if we're talking about health and wellness, I mean, I feel as though it is an intricate part of how we're dealing with COVID. I know, you know, you stated in the beginning, you thought we were only going to be dealing with this for a couple of months. And to be quite honest with you, I thought the same thing. I was very naive and I was trying to be super positive, right? And then suddenly it hit me, I'd say about 2 weeks ago, that, you know what, we're dealing with this for the long haul. And, you know, and that goes back to the viral response program. I mean, it is an important part of how we as employers, investors, as asset managers, how we're dealing with this situation. And you know, I would like to speak to the TIAA and Nuveen Health and Wellness Program, because they do have a very, they have a great program in place where, you know, we can log on to our wellness portal, we can sign up for screenings, coaching, assessments, we can establish a plan, we can track our wellness and health in a very robust way. And the way that we've been, you know, I think successfully dealing with tenants is we have been encouraging the third-party property managers to consistently communicate everything that we're doing at the asset, including the viral response program, you know, that we're partnering with Fitwel on, just so everyone can see, you know, we're trying to get ahead of it. And I know in the beginning we were all just sort of thrown for a loop, right? None of us knew what was going on. But now we are, you know, we're progressive. We want to do the right thing. And we know that mental health is an important piece of doing the right thing. So.
That's great. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I never thought that I would talk about mental health with real estate developers, because, you know, hard enough to talk about like lactation rooms a year ago. They would like run in the other direction. Now I'm talking about mental health too. It's like, what happened, guys? Philippe, do you want to kind of talk about a little bit more about the kind of this balance between these three different aspects? And because Triovest is already a really large and diverse company as far as your assets and the kind of the sectors that you're in. So now we've got a really diverse certification with a diverse portfolio. Like, how are you managing that process? Because you're working across facility managers, construction, new construction, HR, you know, like it's a lot, right? Can you kind of talk to the nuts and bolts of how you're actually managing a process that reaches into a lot of different pieces of the business? Just let's talk about the nuts and bolts for folks that are on the webinar here.
What it offers now starts with a good plan. This is quite big and complicated. So we are not yet certified at an organizational level. We're starting into the process. Perhaps as many on the phone here are. What we've begun by doing is complete a gap analysis using the Fitwel viral response module against the way that we've prepared for welcoming our team. So many of our teams, of course, have never left the buildings. As real estate managers and owners, we're, at least in Canada, classified as an essential service because we need to make sure our spaces are available and operable and safe for many other essential services to operate. But what we've done is use the tool as a gap analysis to identify things. Joanna, you mentioned mental health, like that was, I found really interesting in reviewing the viral response module, how the research has indicated that there is a lot of value in developing a plan for mental health first aid responders and having a training plan so that we can better address. Some of my colleagues I think might be on the phone right now. I think many perhaps in the property management world might feel that they've been acting in some way, shape, or form as psychologists for many of the tenants as well. Like, it's been very, very difficult for many organizations working through this. And I think what we're getting here is we're getting armed with some new knowledge, some new strategies, some new support tools to help us execute expanded mandates, perhaps beyond those which we thought we might have to deal with in our professional capacities. So really, it's a plan, do a gap analysis, identify where you've got opportunities to improve, bring the team together, and systematically prioritize and work through it. We're going to be aiming for distinction when we get certification. We might not do it overnight. We want to do it well. And we want to make sure it's not just a paperwork exercise, and that we've provided the training and communication as well to our teams on what these changes mean. So it's going to take a bit of a lift. I estimate on the Triovest side on the order of probably 200 plus hours of human time to make sure we do this really well. Our perspective, it's going to be worth it.
Great. Yeah, no, so just so folks know, I mean, this is obviously brand new, right? So we just made it, and thank you to all of you because you've all provided great insight as we've been creating it. So as Sara mentioned, when we do anything, we really do listen to the feedback of folks that are our early users, because none of us sit in your seats, right? None of us have a portfolio of buildings. None of us are asset managers. None of us are facility managers or architects. Like, that's not our role. Our role is as this translator, as this steward, basically, of a standard. We sit in the middle, we translate. So your feedback is essential for us. And so, you know, we really do work very closely with all of you to ensure that this is practical and implementable and true to the research. So we sit at this nexus in the middle, and we are learning, and hopefully we are learning fast. We try really hard. So we do appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, I think so for folks who haven't used this yet, who haven't kind of kicked the tires, the way that the module works is that you develop the policies at a company level or at an entity level, whatever the kind of the grouping of buildings that will have a shared set of policies. So for some companies, that will be all of your buildings. So for some other companies, that will be all the buildings you have in a region or in a country, or whatever the grouping of buildings is that will share the same policies. And then once you have those policies approved by us and certified, you can then apply them to all of the assets within that building, within that entity, and that process happens very quickly. So that the actual approval at an asset level will happen within 2 weeks of you getting the actual policies approved. So the big lift is getting the policies certified, and then the approval per asset is a very efficient process after that. So that's the way that we've designed this, so that you can scale it rapidly once you've got those policies in place. So that's the process that we've developed in conjunction with all of these folks. So yeah, no, it's great, and it's good to see it coming to life. So we appreciate that. Jonathan, I wanted to kind of talk about, again, process as we're working through this. I know that when we talked, you were saying that now we've developed these strategies, we've gone through the process, we've looked at the research, we've actually created the policies in a lot of instances, so that you guys don't have to start and actually devise the language and create them. And you said that in some instances, it was kind of confirming what you've already done. In some instances, you're going beyond what you've done. Can you kind of talk about that and how that kind of process has been working for you, again, in practical terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are right now in the process, in the very final stages of our entity certification. So we've submitted everything, and we are actually turning it around for final review in the next week or so. So we're further along in that process. And I think, like we've kind of mentioned a little bit on the call, like everyone, when this happened, went to look at our strategy and create a plan and write standard operating procedures, and all of those things were happening. And I think what this Fitwel program really does for us is it's a way to group all of that together and really organize it. And there were some things that we had already been doing, right? Like we talked a lot about like the engineering and mechanical side of this. We were very comfortable with indoor air quality policies. We were very comfortable with green purchasing policies, cleaning and disinfecting, things like that were pretty easy for us because that was easily in our wheelhouse. There were other things, like a water management plan that we didn't necessarily have something like that on paper before. We had done Legionella testing, of course, but it could have been more comprehensive. There were aspects of the communication policies and other things that we had done some of that. We initiated surveys, we sent emails, we were in constant communication with the tenants, but that was a way to really formalize how we should communicate, what stakeholders should we bring together to talk about those communications. And so, like I kind of mentioned before, it gave us the opportunity to pop the hood, look underneath, see what we had already come up with. And then, there were multiple things, maybe 90% of the certification we had already been doing, but there were other things there that pushed us to go further, to kind of think deeper about our response, and not just, the short-term response and checking the boxes and, submitting the certification, but how is this something that we're going to maintain long-term? And I think Philippe makes a really good point. This is achievable, and Fitwel has done an amazing job making this affordable, making this accessible, making the portal easy to use, giving all of the foundation and the policy documents to set us up for success. And that is a tremendous help, and a testament to the hard work you guys have done. But there is that process of, we don't want to just check the boxes, right? We want to do this right. We want to train all of our teams. We want to make sure that every policy is covered in detail, that we bring in the third-party vendors who help us, see those policies through, whether that's a cleaning vendor or indoor air quality testing vendor, or anyone else that we need to bring in, a water quality expert. We want to make sure that all of those people are in the room or virtually on Zoom, talking through those things and making sure that everyone understands where it's coming from. So the people who actually have to see this through every day in real life, know what the foundation is and know how to successfully carry that out. So I think the process is the most important piece. Again, I'll echo some earlier sentiment that I think Fitwel did absolutely the right thing with the 3 kind of tranches of this, and kind of pushing some of us to get maybe a little bit out of our comfort zone with some of these topics, pushing us to create, because this is a cross-departmental type of thing, right? You need to bring people from HR, engineering, property management, legal, sustainability. It requires ownership, right? It requires everyone to get involved and to kind of lend their expertise and their lens. And I think this program has definitely pushed us to think deeper on that and focus on, how we're going to actually implement this and make a serious impact.
Great, fantastic. So this is where other folks get to ask questions, and we have a couple coming in, but I have a couple of other questions I'd like to ask. So as we start to see some questions, and the first one is really technical, and I don't know whether Sara wants to take it. I know someone in the office who could answer this question. I'm not Sara. I'm not sure if it's Sara. It's not a health question. So we might, if super technical questions come up, the team can absolutely answer them, but we might not answer them during the webinar because I don't want to approximate.
Is it the ASHRAE one?
Yeah.
I can't answer it just because we did look into, I've become much more well-versed in engineering. So the ASHRAE 170 for healthcare facilities, where it requires 12 changes per hour, it is something we explored with both the academics as well as the industry advisors. It's what we learned through those conversations was that there was a better middle ground that would not only increase the ventilation and filtration within these spaces, but it wouldn't be too onerous, where it would increase the energy use to sort of unfeasible levels. And given healthcare facilities, which do have very, very stringent requirements as far as increasing ventilation, we didn't think, like our decision was that we didn't need to meet the as stringent of requirements as a healthcare facility. That said, some facilities such as lab spaces and areas like that will be meeting the requirements of 12 air changes per hour. And how we addressed it is in the enhanced indoor air quality policy, we require 30% higher ventilation rates than ASHRAE 62.1 requires. So if you go into the standard, you'll see sort of how we dealt with that.
So someone asked that we asked the question. So let me just backtrack a little bit. We got very excited with the questions. So the question was about air changes and were we using a particular section of ASHRAE? And so for those of you really not in the weeds with ASHRAE like myself, Sarah was just responding to a particular ASHRAE section. So we will also write a response to this person. So thank you for the question. Someone else is saying that they aren't hearing real science on this question. We are obviously translating the academic review, the academic research into lay people's terms, because that's what we all are, lay people. All of the research that we've talked about, the citations are in Research to Action. And I believe that we have put Research to Action, a link to it, in the into the chat box. So if you want to download Research to Action, it's a fully cited publication. So all of the citations for the research behind the certification is in there, and those are all peer-reviewed research studies. So please go ahead and yeah, the research and the science is all in there. So, and
also just quickly there, we also have sample evidence on, if you go into the Fitwel portal, register a project, you'll see sample evidence that is in support of each of the different strategies and explains why we incorporated them into the module.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the way that Fitwel works, is that every single strategy in Fitwel has peer-reviewed research studies behind them. So they don't make the grade in Fitwel unless they have a body of research behind them. We would not consider them to be a Fitwel strategy if they were only supported by emerging evidence. So that's how they make the grade for Fitwel. So as more questions come in, thick and fast now, see, I don't think there were going to be any. I have much more business questions that I want to talk about. I want to talk about ESG and how you folks are thinking about using this at scale. Natalie, you mentioned ESG earlier. Can we go back to business? As more questions come in, can we just talk about kind of ESG? Just for a second, because it's what I'd like to talk about. You mentioned ESG earlier, and we've been watching ESG anyway for a long time, and kind of that it was already obviously on the radar. Health and ESG were already kind of very much intertwined and an area of focus. And what we've seen is during COVID, the ESG has outperformed conventional assets anyway. Kind of from your vantage point, what are you seeing as far as that is concerned? Well, we get more questions. Let's just go there, and Joanna can have some fun, if you'd like to have that discussion. Or we can
I'd be happy to. I talk about this and think about this a lot. I mean, the short answer is it's a total tidal wave that is completely transforming the capital markets. It was that way before COVID, and as COVID has done with basically everything, it has accelerated twofold, threefold, tenfold existing trends, and that is certainly the case with ESG and investing. So the people in the space will remember that in January, BlackRock announced that it was completely transforming its entire business, largest investor in the world, to put ESG at the center, and really with a focus on climate, because they think it's good business, because they think that many assets across all asset classes are underpriced now, because climate is not factored into the capital markets in a systemic way, and they want to get ahead of it, and they want to gain an advantage. And they were doing that, and then already everyone else many were doing that as well, but mostly the rest of the investment world was scrambling to figure out what that meant for them. And then COVID hit, and ESG, as you said, has just completely diverged from all kind of traditional indices, and has outperformed in so many ways. So, I mean, I think it was already the fastest growing segment of investment classes, and it's now going to be so even more. Which is a great, I mean, and which means then there's winners and losers, and companies that are not leaders on ESG will be seen as higher risk and will lose, and vice versa.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Interesting. And then Philippe, I heard you mention scale, and that was another question that I had, was one of scale, because this is something that we pre-COVID with Fitwel use, were seeing folks using Fitwel on a limited number of assets, and we were just beginning to see the kind of a few companies beginning to think about health kind of at scale. And then we think now COVID is going to blow that open, that it's going to go from being a nice to have to a have to have. To, you know, that health is going to now be an essential question that you have to answer, like how are you promoting the health of the occupants of your building, whether you're an investor asking that question or whether you're an occupant in the building. But I'd love to kind of understand if you see suddenly that this is now a matter of, you're going to have to be able to scale this. Whatever you do is going to have to be done at scale rather than just as a kind of a pick and choose. I mean, we would like that to be the case, of course.
I agree, Natalie, with your comments in terms of accelerant. To do things well at scale required standards, and what the viral response module, certainly in this proximate case, does it gives reference to a great body of scientific knowledge codified in real estate speak, with some practical strategies that we can implement and establish those baselines. Like, there's so much value in establishing that baseline against which then you can continuously improve. And I imagine, Sara, like, we're going to keep learning little bits and pieces as we go, and perhaps the Fitwel viral response might even shift little bits as we learn new things. But having standards is really important. And in terms of, we're seeing it in RFPs from leading tenants, no question, health is being more and more prioritized. This is very important. And in different ways, health and well-being was already codified in a lot of the green building rating systems that pre-exist. Just what's happening now is we're augmenting what might have, for example, been in LEED or BOMA-BEST or some other, with a bit more focus and perspective. And what we're looking to do, certainly, just learn as quickly as we can. And we've registered approximately 30 buildings, all office buildings over 200,000 square feet, just to complete a benchmarking exercise across this 10 million square feet and understand where things are at. They might not get certified now, but it lets our teams understand where things are going well and where there's opportunities to improve. And every building has opportunities to improve, and teams and individuals, we do as well. So very, very important at scale to have a reference point that can be used in a standard way, so you can measure up and understand how you can get better.
Sure. Nichole, do you want to talk about scale?
Sure. So I know there's so many buildings that we have in our portfolio, but what we do appreciate about Fitwel is that, to Philippe's point, we have now a metric, a scorecard type of system set up with Fitwel being the way that it's organized. And so now we can track where we are and where we need to improve or where we need to spend our capital dollars. Because I will say that, before COVID hit, our sustainability team was pushing and pushing and pushing so that we can and will reduce our footprint, right? And that is all part of your viral response program, and also being certified, Fitwel certified, which is a little more intense and robust. But we also are setting up assets to see where we need to improve and where we can improve and where we can get the Fitwel certification that we're working on now. So I think the viral response program that Jonathan was saying earlier is more attainable because it is, you guys give us the footprint, you guys give us all the links to, like, okay, if you guys don't have an air quality control program, here are the minimum requirements, and here's how you can achieve it. So, I mean, it really is a no-brainer. I mean, anyone can log on to this thing and you can get all of the answers and implement them at your assets.
Great. No, we would like you to just, maybe we should do that for all of them. Now, my team is like, in the background, like, don't say that. or I could triple the team, I guess. But there's a question here about asking about whether we have a post-pandemic response, whether Fitwel has a post-pandemic response. And I would say we have a pre-pandemic response, and that is chronic disease prevention. That's not me joking. That actually is for real, guys, and addressing equity. So the last two chapters of the research to action book were really looking at chronic disease prevention and addressing equity, because we live in New York City, right? Center for Active Design is based in New York. 89% of the people who've died of COVID in New York had comorbidities. They had existing chronic diseases. And the disproportionate effects of COVID have been on folks who were already suffering from disparities of income and all, kind of all manner of disparities. And so I think addressing underlying health of the population, addressing the underlying chronic disease of the population really is the long-term health strategy that we need to be addressing, because it will then actually ensure that the whole population is healthier generally. And mental health would fall into looking at the overall health of the population. Our mental health globally was already dreadful pre-COVID, and it was already heading in the wrong direction as far as the trends were concerned. So I think there was so much we already needed to do before a pandemic hit, that the health trends and the overall kind of disparities in our health were already dire. So yes, that we do have a post-pandemic plan. It's called Fitwel. So we look forward to reintroducing how to prevent chronic disease and looking at mental health in an equitable way to everybody. So I think we are almost at time, folks, and I do want to just let folks know what they can do as next steps. So thank you all very much for spending your time with us today and sharing all of your experiences. And I really do appreciate that. So thank you to all of our panelists. As usual, there's lots going on at the Center for Active Design, and this is just the Fitwel stuff. We are actually writing a new set of active design guidelines with the City of New York, which is very exciting and very timely. So that's going to be quite the challenge. It's going to come out in early 2021. Anyway, so that's food for thought for another time. So we do have a number of things. We have a new, another webinar coming for our ambassadors. There is a deadline coming up for folks who want to submit in 2020 to have their viral response certification submitted and certified in 2020, if that's important to you, to have that on this year's books. That's going to be mid-November, as you can see here. And then there's various trainings and webinars that are coming up this year, as you can see from the screen. We have all of these resources available for you guys to download. As I mentioned, the Research to Action publication is free, and folks can download it, and all of that research that we put together for that is cited in that publication. So thank you again, panelists. Thank you everybody for sticking with us and listening to us today. And we'll talk very soon. Thanks everybody.